Thank you. So, look, I've managed the time terribly. I rushed everyone, and we still only have, we're still behind on time. But we'll move now to the final panel, where we'll have Watanabe-san, Ambassador Bilahari, Yiping, and Rebecca provide some concluding remarks. Really, only a few minutes each. We've got a pretty hard time constraint at past. But reflecting on the discussion, I hope each panelist can provide some answers and some way forwards. So over to you, Watanabe-san first.
Thank you, Shiro. Just quick, number one, we recognize a fundamental difference in the core philosophy and values. That's a reality we have to face. Number two, in terms of issue coverage and agenda coverage, now issue goes beyond the traditional trade agenda. TPP was negotiated a decade ago. Since then, the technological and economic landscape have changed quite rapidly. We have today big data is gathered through autonomous driving, cashless payment, and smart cities. So how to ensure trusted access to personal data by governments and large private platforms, how to protect the privacy and cyber security, and how to apply competition policy are increasing significance. Number three, regarding the approach, today we got some suggestions on the approach. In some areas, we can reach agreement, and in other areas, we need to start with building confidence by ensuring transparency and interoperability of different systems. And also, Peter and Rebecca suggested co-regulation and involvement of private sectors. Of course, negotiation between the governments will play a role, but in the end, digital governance needs to be supported by multiple stakeholders in society, including business, consumers, investors, and others. Just a PR exercise. METI recently published a draft proposal on governance innovation version 2. It's a very interesting, intellectually interesting document, so just for your reference. And finally, we discussed the context in Asia Pacific, but digital economy by nature is global. So we have to ensure interoperability and harmony with other parts of the world, including Europe. I hope now everyone is a bit more optimistic after listening to all the panelists. Thank you, Shiro.
Thank you, Watanabe-san. Ambassador Bilahari.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be very brief. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Huh? As I told you, and I was not being falsely modest, I started from a position of almost completely ignorance. And then listening to the people on the other people on the first panel, Wendy and Professor Huang, I got a little bit more optimistic that perhaps in a narrow domain, something can be done. Then I listened to the second panel, and some of the optimism, not all, dissipated because some more of the complexities of doing something even in a narrow domain came out. But I think I take away two broad conclusions from listening, and I thank everybody for educating me. First of all, digitalization is going to happen whether we like it or not. It's not going to wait for states to regulate it. It's going ahead, being driven primarily by the private sector, by entrepreneurs. On the other hand, private sector cannot be trusted to regulate itself. That's clear when you see the struggles of various governments, Western governments, my own, with social media platform like Facebook. Their motive is profit. It is not the common good. It is not the public good, right? And that's a fundamental difference. So they have to be regulated. But the regulation, whether in a narrow domain or in a broad domain, cannot avoid some of those fundamental issues that I expose maybe rather crudely at the very beginning. And therefore, I think because it's going to go ahead whether we like it or not, we, meaning the states, the governments, because it's going to go ahead, because the private sector cannot be totally trusted to regulate itself, that's a failure, I think. It's a fallacy to think private sector can regulate itself. We are going to have to live with a certain degree of fragmentation, more than we probably like, but we will have to live with it anyway, with a spaghetti bowl of a certain size, how big, I don't know, for quite some time to come. But this thing is not going to wait for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yiping. We can't hear you, sorry, Yiping. You're on mute.
Okay. Well, I also learned quite a lot from the discussion just now. I like to reflect on two issues. The first issue is about the need for an international initiative on the policies, regulations, and so on. This is particularly important because this is evolving rapidly in many countries. And I think some kind of international standard, if we can move early, will be much better than move later, because once the regimes are set in individual countries, it will become much more difficult. But I think Deborah had a point earlier on when she pointed out whether or not you need a digital ministry. Probably everything will still be in the same economy. I have same kind of idea, and we talk about the digital finance in China. But my sense is in 20 years, there will be no digital finance because all finance will be digital. So the question is how you do it. But in China, some provincial government did set up a Bureau of Big Data, which became a driver of digitalization of the economy. So it's kind of useful. And I don't have any particular idea whether we need a separate international organization for this, but some kind of initiative, maybe on the existing platform, is important. The point I was making earlier on, not about the institutional arrangement, but more about the digital technological capability. When we're talking about the regulation, and especially later on, if we really want to enforce the regulation, you kind of need the skills, the platforms, and the capability of monitoring and regulating. This is something maybe we need to address later on. The second issue is about the role of China in the potential digital trade. And as I said, my own sense is political regime is not going to change easily. But that does not necessarily mean things won't change like this. If you look at China over the past 40 years, you would know it's a very different China today compared to 40 years ago. So there are lots of things I think we can discuss about what is the proper way of regulating the digital economy. And I just give you one example. The Chinese government now openly declared that it's determined to join CPTPP if it's possible. That is a very bold decision, as you all would agree. And I consulted some government officials who were involved in this assessment. And I asked them what was the conclusion, takeaway of the assessment. If we are allowed to join, can we do it? The answer was, after careful assessment, their conclusion was it will be difficult, but it's doable. So that, I think, is a very important indication that if we have an international arrangement, that actually could help to move China in the right direction. Hopefully that's good for China and that's good for the rest of the world. Thank you, Shiro.
Thank you, Yiping. Rebecca.
Thank you. Like Bilahari says, this has been a very insightful, very educational period for 1.5, 2.5 hours. Well spent, Shiro. And my takeaway is, having listened to everybody, clearly there is a need for leadership. What kind of leadership is a question. And that's one. So leadership, whether the leadership will come from middle powers, as you see in DAPA, or my inclination is more to look at, since these are early days and we have to work fast. So my thing is using a platform like APEC, for example, where you have the parties the various parties there already. And we provide, there is that platform for an appreciation and understanding because we're non-binding. So we have that, we can create that platform for appreciation and understanding of what digital governance really means. What are the benefits? I think there was a question about, are we focusing enough on benefits? Are we messaging the benefits enough? So I think that's one. And APEC also has that tradition of creating roundtables, the roundtables which involve the technical people, the private sector, academics, you know, so big tech companies. This is where that important conversation around helping folks understand and appreciate, policymakers appreciate what is it that you want to do, what standards are you talking about, what interoperability are you talking about. So that kind of thinking through before you get to the issue of developing a platform or even, you know, some kind of framework for governance. And I like what Wendy said about starting with principles, and that again is a strength of APEC. We look at forming coalitions and agreements and getting like-minded folks to push that, to form that tailwind, as it were, towards the ultimate aim. So that's the two things. One, leadership, and the leadership that can be provided by a body like APEC, needing to use more of that, more engagement with folks like RIETI, like you Shiro, you're doing, bringing in the necessary people. What's missing in this group really is the big tech companies, you know, hearing from them. I think that's one missing element, the really techie people to tell us, I'm a policymaker and really I need to be guided. I cannot have policy in a vacuum. I need to understand what it is I want to regulate. You know, why is it I want to regulate it? And what are the benefits that will come from this regulation? I think those kinds of conversations are very important, and we can easily have that platform, you know, whether it's APEC, whether it's ASEAN, it's possible.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we will have to continue this discussion, I think, with big tech and other business interests without getting captured or having the agenda diverted. So it's my job now to just thank everyone and wrap up. Look, I got a lot out of this discussion today. A lot of our countries are dealing with shared and common interests between us, even those with completely different political and economic systems. I think moving towards multilateral rules, which are really difficult, it's important to agree slowly to principles. And we've covered those a bit. And I think that requires a lot of technical cooperation, capacity building, and non-binding cooperation, like in APEC and other forums where you know, you can build trust and build confidence. And I think there have been some suggestions today around digital trade facilitation and other real positive sum issues that are going to help our countries. So that also raises the issue of memberships of different groups pushing these forward, and just to emphasize the open regionalism approach that we've taken in the region. Regional cooperation or cooperation with a group that's not at the expense of non-members. You know, if we want to encourage the Chinas to join in, or Vietnam later on, and countries that can't meet these standards now, these agreements have to be open to other countries. And of course, we haven't even talked at length about the European Union, a major standard setter and an important player here. So there was a question about top-down or bottom-up. I think we're going to need both. We've got a lot of bottom-up action, but we do need, you know, agreed multilateral principles to guide some of that bottom-up. And others have spoken about this. We have some. I commend Japan on the Data Free Flow of Trust initiative through the G20. That's a really important initiative. Also some action in the WTO. I'd say not enough, but that's where I think we need the leadership that Rebecca mentioned. So on that note, let me please thank the speakers, all our panelists who joined and really shared their experience and their wisdom. Really grateful for that. Let me please thank RIETI, all my colleagues at RIETI, for our 4th ANU RIETI Symposium. May there be many more. And finally, let me thank the audience who joined in. And to answer Deborah's question on who's listening in, is it a relevant quality audience? I can assure you it is. Got key people from around the region, whether officials or academia, or the private sector. And the audiences list was quite spectacular, and I'm delighted. And as you would have seen from this, I think this is going to be a discussion that's going to continue. We look forward to keeping in touch. So with that, thank you very much for joining.